Good evening. Labor MPs have been caught red-handed rorting almost $400,000 of Parliament funds during the 2014 election campaign. The ombudsman blew the final whistle on the abuse of taxpayers' money, forcing Premier Daniel Andrews to apologise.
A vaguely repentant Premier on the ropes, his government reeling after being accused of widespread rorting to win government.
You've asked me whether I would apologise. Absolutely. I would very much prefer that this had not occurred.
Ombudsman Deborah Glass called Labor's scheme to employ 21 campaign staff through MPs' offices an artifice, a cunning, clever device to trick or deceive the public.
And it was wrong. Trust in our politicians is declining and diminishes further with allegations of misuse of public funds.
The Ombudsman found 21 MPs, including 6 current ministers and 5 backbenchers, breached Parliament's Members' Guide by certifying payments to casual electoral officers that were used for party political campaigning, costing taxpayers almost $370,000. A red-faced Labor Party has repaid the money, initially funnelled to the so-called red shirts, the community action campaign activists the Premier was so proud of.
How many activists does it take to change a government? About this many, I reckon. About this many.
The opposition called for political blood and mass resignations.
Why is it okay for Daniel Andrews' government to say, well, we've thieved from the taxpayer, but we've paid it back, now all's forgiven?
Whilsteblower Jake Finnigan swears the Premier was at the initial private induction of the campaign staff.
The Premier was there. He was there on the morning to sort of welcome us to the role.
But the Premier can't remember.
I don't know whether you can say where you were 4 years ago or 3.5 years ago. I would need to check my records.
Mr Finnigan, who is employed by John Aaron's Lara office but worked in Lisa Neville's marginal ballerina electorate, says he's been vindicated.
If they did the honourable thing, they'd resign their seats. Obviously that's not going to happen.
I've made it very clear that I am sorry that this has occurred.
Live now to Brendan Donoghue at State Parliament. And Brendan, that was the big question. Will any of these ministers or backbenchers resign?
Well, no, Peter, not at this stage at least, despite many voters believing that they should go after being caught red-handed by the Ombudsman. Now, the Premier and Labor MPs are hiding behind the fact that technically they didn't break any state laws. They broke the Members' Guide of State Parliament. But there's no doubt they did break public trust. And the severity for that penalty, well, that will be felt at the ballot box when Victorians vote in late November. Peter?
Thanks, Brendan.
Good evening. Premier Daniel Andrews has denied stealing the 2014 state election but has been forced to apologise after a damning report by the Ombudsman into Labor's use of the taxpayer money to help fund its campaign. 21 current and former MPs were found to have breached Parliament's Members' Guide, including senior ministers. State political reporter Andrew Lund.
After 3 costly court cases, Ombudsman Deborah Glass tabled her long-awaited report into Labor's rorting of the parliamentary staffing system.
The arrangement to employ field organisers as electorate officers was an artifice to secure partial payment for the campaign out of public funds, and it was wrong.
It's estimated Labor billed taxpayers more than $387,000 to help win the 2014 election.
People operated on a not unreasonable assumption that this was an extension of long-standing arrangements that have actually occurred, I think, in all political parties in one form or another over a long period of time.
Jake Finnigan was employed as part of the scheme to work in the office of Sport Minister John Aaron.
I ended up working out of the now Police Minister Lisa Neville's office in Ballerina, separated by a good 15 kilometres and one electric sandwiched in between them. I did no work for John Aaron whatsoever.
In total, 21 Labor MPs were found to have breached Parliament's Members' Guide. The then leader of the Labor opposition in the upper house, John Lenders, devised the scheme and signed off on timesheet hours worth more than $44,000, while current ministers Jenny Mikakos, Gail Tierney, Gavin Jennings, Lily D'Ambrosio, Martin Pakula and John Aaron, as well as former Minister Adam Somyurek, also participated.
These ministers should absolutely lose their jobs.
The Premier says that won't happen, But after years protesting the party's innocence,
there are rules and they've been followed strictly.
Today he was dragged to something of an apology.
I am sorry that this has occurred.
Daniel Andrews says Labor has now repaid the money and will work to implement the Ombudsman's 6 recommendations.
And Andrew joins me now from State Parliament. Andrew, what should voters make of this?
Well, look, Pete, while there's no recommendation for any further action against MPs, voters have every right to feel cheated. Labor came to power promising to lift parliamentary standards, but since then we've seen Telmo Languilla and Don Nardella demoted for rorting their secondary residence allowance, while Steve Herbert resigned after being caught using his taxpayer-funded ministerial car to chauffeur around his pet dogs. Now a finding that Labor used taxpayers' money to further its own political interests. At the very least, it should prompt some soul-searching within government ranks about just who they're being paid to look out for. Pete?
Andrew Lund.